What do you do when your wife calls you an unemployed failure on the same day your company quietly hands you a $200,000 severance and a better offer is already waiting? How do you stay calm when the person who dumped you by text suddenly wants second chances after she sees you step out of a new luxury car you bought without her? Can a man who was treated like a walking wallet use contracts, screenshots, and simple boundaries to end the game in one message that she never recovers from? Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. My name is Ethan Ward, and most people who know me would probably use the same three words if you asked about me: calm, reliable, boring. For a long time, I did not hear those words as insults. I wore them like a uniform. I was the man who kept the lights on, paid the bills on time, remembered renewal dates and logins. At work, I was the operations guy who stayed late when a shipment went wrong. At home, I was the husband who checked locks, cooked simple dinners, and drove carefully even when the road was empty. I honestly believed this was what it meant to be a good man and a good husband. I did not notice, or did not want to notice, how those same three words slowly changed shape in my wife's mouth when she talked about me in front of other people. Lena liked to tell me we were a team, but our days did not look like a fair team. I woke early every weekday in the dark and made coffee in our quiet kitchen. I packed my lunch, checked overnight emails, and left the house while she was still wrapped in the blanket with the curtains closed. She worked part-time in event planning and was trying to build a presence online, so most days when I came home, she was on the couch with her laptop and her phone in her hands, editing pictures or watching videos about luxury weddings in places we could not afford. When I asked how her day had gone, she usually said she was exhausted, that creativity was tiring, that people did not understand how hard building a brand was. I never argued. I just went into the kitchen and started chopping vegetables. Money was the one area where I let myself be firm. I grew up in a house where one missed paycheck meant the heat went off. My parents worked hard and still lived close to the edge. When I got my first real job, I promised myself I would not live that way. I saved, built an emergency fund, kept a simple spreadsheet of our costs. I tried to keep us a little below what we could spend. This clashed with the life Lena watched on her screen. When I talked about saving, she rolled her eyes. She said I thought like an old man and that I was wasting our best years worrying about what if. When I told her my company had started talking about cutting costs and that layoffs were possible, she said I was dramatic. She told me my company would never let someone like me go because I basically lived there. She added, half joking and half not, that even if the worst happened, she would reinvent herself, because she refused to be dragged down by anyone else's fear. That night I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open, reading a memo from management about trimming fat and streamlining roles. The knot in my stomach was real. Still, I told myself I was too useful to lose. I had 10 years of history with that company. I knew which systems always broke first and which drivers could be trusted in storms. In my mind, that counted for something. I closed the laptop and told myself tomorrow would be fine. In the living room, Lena sat on the couch, laughing as she scrolled. She called out that her trainer, Tyler, had invited us to join a group at a new restaurant on Friday, and that it would be good for me to stop thinking about work all the time. I said we could go. Saying no always felt like it would start a fight I was too tired to have. By the time Friday came, I was worn down from another week of problems at work. I did not feel like going anywhere. But I drove home, changed out of my work clothes, and tried. Lena met me at the door in a tight, shiny dress I had never seen before. She did a slow spin and asked if it looked good on camera. I told her she looked beautiful. She smiled and said I needed to look less like I had just crawled out of a spreadsheet. She picked a dark shirt for me and said it was less dad, more city, then adjusted my collar, joking that I should at least look like I belonged in a photo next to her. I laughed a little, even though the comment stung. The restaurant looked like it had been designed for social media: plants on the walls, neon words, dim lights, music just loud enough to force people to lean in close. Almost every table had someone holding up a phone to film or pose. We found Tyler and his group at a long table near the back. Tyler stood to greet Lena with a hug that lasted longer than I liked. Then he turned to me and gave me a quick handshake. He said he had heard a lot about me, that Lena always said I was the one who kept the roof over their heads. He added with a grin that it must be nice to be the stable one while everyone else had fun. People around him laughed. I smiled and said stability was underrated, then sat down beside my wife. Drinks arrived, then starters. Tyler told story after story about his clients and his late nights, his rich members and famous people he had trained once for a weekend. Lena listened with bright eyes. At one point, one of Tyler's friends turned to me and asked what I did. I gave the short version. I said I managed operations for a logistics tech company, that my job was to make sure goods moved where they needed to go and nothing important got lost. The friend nodded slowly and said that sounded safe, then added that it also sounded super boring. Tyler laughed, clapped me on the shoulder, and said every group needed at least one man like me, the one who stayed home and thought about bills so everyone else could live a little. Lena did not push back. Instead, she joined in. She told them I was very reliable, that I always paid everything on time, that I was the reason she could focus on creative work without worrying about basics. She could have stopped there. Instead, she added that sometimes she felt like she was married to a spreadsheet, that I could turn any conversation into a lecture about pensions and layoff risk. She said she loved me, but sometimes she wished I would stop acting like an old man and just buy the trip or bag without a long talk. People laughed again. I felt my face heat. I took a sip of water and reminded myself she was just joking. The jokes kept coming. Tyler raised his glass and said someone like Lena was too young and bright to be dragged down by fear, that she needed someone who matched her energy. He said, still smiling, that a man who let himself get laid off and then sat on the couch was dead weight. Lena laughed and told him she could never respect a man who stopped trying, that she refused to play nurse or mother to someone who gave up on life. She said, still in that half-joking, half-serious tone, that if her husband ever lost his job and stayed down, she would pack a bag and leave before the dust settled. The words thudded in my chest. 2 days earlier, I had told her my company was openly talking about cutting roles, that nothing was guaranteed. She knew that. She still chose to frame the idea of me losing my job as a joke, a line for her trainer and his friends. I looked around the table. Some people laughed. One woman just stared at her drink. When the server came with the next round, she gave me a quick look that felt like apology, like she had seen this pattern before with other couples. In that moment, I understood that this was not only between me and Lena. Other people could see how she spoke about me and how I swallowed it. The rest of the night blurred. I smiled when I needed to, nodded at stories, and let the noise wash over me. Lena took photos of her drink and of herself leaning toward the camera with the restaurant behind her. I paid for most of the bill. Outside, in the parking lot, the air was cool. In the car on the way home, Lena scrolled through the pictures, picking which ones to post. I drove in silence for a while. Then I asked in a low voice if she really meant what she said about leaving a man who lost his job. She sighed and said I was overthinking, that everyone was just playing around, that nobody wanted to talk about risk and retirement on a Friday night. She added that of course she believed in me, but she also believed in not letting anyone else's failure kill her dreams. We pulled into our driveway. She went inside and headed straight for the couch. I stayed in the kitchen. The house was quiet except for the faint sound of the TV and her laughter from the living room as she posted her photos. I opened my laptop on the counter, more out of habit than anything, and checked my email before bed. At the top of my inbox sat a new message from our HR department, sent while we were at the restaurant. The subject line was polite and short. It asked me to come in for a quick check-in regarding my role at 10 o'clock on Monday. I stared at the words while the fridge hummed beside me and Lena laughed in the next room, and in that small square of light I felt the first crack open in the picture of the life I thought I understood. Saturday morning came, and I woke before Lena as usual. The house was still and gray. I lay there for a few minutes, listening to her soft breathing and the faint traffic outside, thinking about the email from HR. My mind kept circling those few words about a quick check-in. I knew what that usually meant. Years in operations had taught me how companies speak when they want to do something unpleasant without saying it directly. I thought about waking Lena and telling her right then. I imagined her sleepy face wrinkling with annoyance because I had disturbed her. I imagined her telling me again that I was dramatic. Instead, I slipped out of bed, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen table with my mug between my hands. As the caffeine settled into me, my thoughts slid backward, to the beginning of all this. I met Lena at an industry event years earlier. My company had sponsored a logistics conference at a hotel. I was there to talk on a dry panel about supply chain risk. She was working as an assistant for the event company, running around with a headset, fixing small problems before anyone else noticed. At the end of the day, I saw her in a side hallway, leaning against a wall, rubbing her feet, and laughing with another staff member about guests who complained about everything. She had this fast, bright energy that pulled my tired eyes toward her. We started talking. She said she liked that I was not trying to impress anyone, that I just explained what I did instead of turning it into a performance. Back then, what she called boring later, she called steady. She told me she had never dated anyone who showed up on time and kept their word. She showed me her small studio apartment a few weeks later, proud that she was managing on her own. It was cluttered but full of ideas, mood boards, scraps of fabric, old event photos tacked everywhere. Her dream was to move from assistant to planner, to run big events herself one day and maybe have her own company. I saw how hard she worked, how often she carried heavy boxes while smiling for demanding clients. I respected that. When our relationship got serious, I pushed for us to find a better place together. I had some savings, she did not. I told her it did not matter, we would build something together. I was the one who handled the paperwork for our first rental, then for the mortgage when we bought the house. Lena hated forms. She said they made her feel trapped. I, on the other hand, felt a strange peace when things were written down and clear. I paid the closing costs almost entirely from my account. She signed what the bank asked her to sign without reading carefully, trusting me to handle it. At the time, her trust felt like intimacy. It did not occur to me that she was also trusting me to cushion every fall for both of us, without thinking about how heavy that might get. In those early years, she tried small jobs, a vendor booth here, a wedding assist there. Some months she did well, others she earned almost nothing. Each time she struggled, I covered the gap without complaint. When a client failed to pay on time, I quietly paid the rent from my salary and told her we would be fine. When she wanted to buy better equipment or take a short course, I put it on my card and told myself we were investing in our shared future. She promised each time that when her business finally took off, she would take over some of the load and let me rest. I held on to that promise like a picture in my head. Slowly, the picture changed. Social media became her main focus. Instead of chasing reliable clients, she chased photos and impressions. She started posting heavily about building her brand, about choosing herself, about refusing to settle. Our life became raw material. She took pictures of the brunch I made on Sundays and wrote captions about manifesting abundance. She posted shots of her coffee next to my open laptop and wrote about balancing hustle and love, as if she were out there fighting for both while I just sat in the background. People online commented about her grind, her ambition. They did not see who covered shortfalls when creative weeks did not bring any money. There were tender moments, too, for a long time. Nights when she curled up next to me and said she was grateful I was not like her exes. She told me stories about men who had promised the world and vanished, who had spent rent money on a watch, who had cheated on her and then acted like she was crazy for being upset. She said being with me felt safe, that I grounded her. I believed those words more than I listened to the others. It took me longer than it should have to understand that in her mind, safe and exciting were opposite poles, and one of them was slowly choking the other. When she joined Tyler's gym, things shifted again. At first, I was glad. She wanted to move more, feel better, get out of the house. Then Tyler started appearing in more and more stories on her phone. They filmed short clips of her lifting weights, laughing with him between sets. She called him her motivator, said he pushed her to demand more from life. When I stopped by the gym once to pick her up, I saw it all from another angle. Loud music, mirrors, people performing for one another. Tyler spotted me, gave me a quick nod, then went back to making Lena laugh. I stood near the entrance watching her and heard her say to another woman that her husband was a good guy but stuck in his fear mindset, that he could not see beyond bills and security. Tyler told her in a joking voice that she was carrying both herself and her man's limits on her back like extra weight. They laughed. None of them knew I was close enough to hear. At work, people treated me very differently. My team knew me as the one who kept things from falling apart when a truck broke down or a system crashed. When a shipment got stuck at a border or a warehouse misscanned pallets, people called me. I had built a map in my head over the years of where the weak spots were. It was not glamorous, but it mattered. When I mentioned at home that I had solved some crisis, Lena would listen for a minute, then steer the talk to something else. She said she did not want to hear about boring stress when she was trying to relax. She said she wanted to dream bigger, not talk about boxes and trucks. My coworker Marissa saw more than Lena did. She worked in a different department, but we often ran into each other in the break room. She noticed the way my shoulders hunched when I read messages on my phone. One day she asked if everything was okay at home. I said yes, just tension about money and goals. She quietly told me about her ex, how he had lived off her income and then left when she got sick and could not work as much. She said that in her experience, people who treat you like a sturdy tool eventually forget you are a person too, especially when they start telling their friends stories that make them look like heroes and you look like a prop. I heard her words, but at the time I still thought our situation was different. Things that might have alarmed me if they happened all at once instead came in drops. A comment here, a complaint there. Lena started calling me old man when I chose not to go to late parties. When I reminded her of due dates or asked her to send an invoice on time, she said I sounded like her father. She joked to her followers that she was married to a spreadsheet and low-key jealous of how much he loves his budget. Under those posts, people laughed and wrote that at least she had stability while she chased her dreams. I never commented. I just clicked like and told myself it was harmless. Then layoffs became a real possibility at my company. We went through a stretch where a major client threatened to leave. The stress on my team grew sharp. Management started sending emails with phrases like right-sizing and realigning our resources. I mentioned this to Lena over dinner one night, saying that while I was not sure, I would feel better if we cut back a little until things were clearer. I suggested skipping a trip she wanted to book. She dropped her fork and stared at me like I had insulted her. She said she refused to live in fear. She said she would not put her life on hold because I saw danger everywhere. She added that if I started spiraling about layoffs, that was my problem, but she would not let me pull her down with it. That fight ended with me apologizing for worrying. It was only when I stepped back later that I saw the pattern. Each time I brought up risk or responsibility, she treated it as a character flaw. Each time I quietly fixed a mess, she treated it as background noise. The dinner at the restaurant with Tyler and the jokes about leaving an unemployed man did not come out of nowhere. They were just the clearest version of what she had been saying in softer words for years. The night after that dinner, Sunday evening, I sat at the kitchen table again with my laptop open and a stack of mail in front of me. The house was calm. The TV murmured in the living room where Lena scrolled and half-watched some show. I had the joint credit card statement in my hand, full of restaurant charges, gym payments, and little purchases for her brand. I paid it, like I always did. As I typed in the amount, I heard her call from the doorway, asking if I was working again. I said no, that I was paying our card. I mentioned quietly that if layoffs did happen and there was even a short gap in my income, this balance would feel heavier than it did now. She walked into the kitchen, glass in hand, and leaned against the counter. She told me I was doing it again, that I was creating problems before they existed. She said real men figured things out and did not sit around being afraid of what if. I said I was not afraid, only realistic. I added that nobody's job was completely safe, not even mine, and that I just wanted us to be ready. She stared at me for a long second, then said something I would remember in perfect detail later. She said she could never respect a man who let himself get laid off and stay down, that a husband who lost his job and became, in her words, dead weight on the couch, was no different from a child. She said any woman who stayed with someone like that was not being a wife, she was being a mom. Then she shrugged, told me not to worry because she was sure I would not let that happen, and walked back to the living room while I sat at the table, holding the statement in my hands, the cursor blinking on the payment screen like a small, impatient heartbeat. Monday morning, I drove to work with a heaviness in my chest I could not shake. The office looked the same as always when I walked in. People nodded, screens glowed, the coffee machine hissed. Nothing on the surface said that anything was different, but my body knew. The 10 o'clock meeting blocked on my calendar sat there like a dark square. I tried to answer a few emails, but my eyes kept drifting to the corner of the screen where the time ticked forward. At 9:45, I closed my laptop, stood up, and made the short walk down the hallway toward HR. My steps sounded too loud on the floor, even though nobody looked up. I had walked this path 1,000 times for other reasons. This time, I felt like I was walking toward a door I could not come back through. Inside the small conference room, Roger and Alicia were already seated. There was a folder on the table, a glass of water, and a box of tissues no one mentioned. The setup told me everything before anyone opened their mouth. I sat down, folded my hands, and listened. Roger spoke in the smooth, tired language of someone who had given this talk many times. He said the company was restructuring, that some roles were being consolidated, that despite my good performance, my specific position was no longer needed in the new structure. He said it was not personal. He said they valued my years of service. Alicia added details about timelines and access, her tone calm and professional. I felt something inside me go very quiet. I did not argue. I did not ask why I and not someone else. I already knew the reasons did not matter at this stage. What mattered was what came next. Then Alicia said there was also a severance arrangement the company was offering. She explained that because I had been there for so many years, and because there had been no issues with my performance, they were giving me a significant package. It would cover several months of pay, unused vacation, and some additional amount in recognition of my work and to avoid any legal trouble later. She mentioned the number once, clearly, and it sat in the air between us. It was a lot of money, more than I had expected, enough to breathe on for a while if I used it wisely. For a second, my throat tightened, not with anger, but with a strange mixture of grief and relief. I had given years to this place. I had walked through storms for them. And now they were letting me go, but they were not throwing me out with nothing. They were paying, not for my loyalty exactly, but for the right to move on without me making noise. I understood that too. Alicia slid the folder toward me and said it contained the full details and that I could take a few days to review before signing anything. She reminded me to meet with the internal career counselor if I wished, then told me my access would remain active for a short transition period. When the meeting ended, I carried the folder back to my desk like it weighed 20 kilos. In reality, it was just a few sheets of paper. My team looked at me with cautious eyes as I walked past. News always travels faster than official announcements. I sat down, took a breath, and opened my inbox. There were already messages from IT and HR about next steps. I forwarded what I needed to my personal email, then stared at my phone. There was one more call I had to make before I did anything else. Daniel picked up on the second ring. We had spoken a few weeks before, when his company had quietly reached out to me through a mutual contact. At the time, nothing was certain. He said they were impressed by my track record, said they might have a role opening up that matched my experience. I had told him then that I was open to talking, but that I was not actively looking. Now our situation had changed. I told him calmly that my company had just eliminated my position. He was quiet for a moment, then said this moved things forward for them as well. He said their internal approvals were almost complete. He could not send a contract yet, but he could tell me that the offer they planned to make would match my current salary and then some. He sounded genuinely pleased to hear I might join them. I ended the call feeling more grounded than I had in that conference room. I was no longer guessing. My work life had been knocked off the shelf, but it had not shattered. Part of it had already landed somewhere else, even if not officially. I spent the rest of the morning packing my things slowly. I took framed photos down from my desk, gathered my notebooks, slipped a few small personal items into a box. Co-workers came by one, some with awkward jokes, some with quiet apologies. Marissa hugged me and told me I deserved better than this place, and better at home too, though she did not say that last part out loud. When I finally carried the box out to my car, the sun was high and too bright. The parking lot looked ordinary, but the act of placing that box in the trunk made everything real in a way words had not. I sat behind the wheel for a minute with my hands resting on it. Then I drove home. On the way, I thought about how to tell Lena. In my mind, I planned to walk into the house, sit at the kitchen table, and tell her everything. The layoff, the severance, the call with Daniel, the possibilities and the fears. I imagined her being shocked, then maybe scared, then maybe supportive once she heard about the money and the new opportunity. I still carried that hope, small and stubborn, even after everything she had said at the restaurant and at the table over the credit card bill. When I pulled into our driveway, Lena's car was not there. I assumed she was at the gym or with a friend. I carried the box inside and put it down on the kitchen counter. The house felt empty in a way I had not felt before. I walked into the living room. There was no glass on the table, no open laptop, no small mess of makeup or notebooks. The air itself felt wrong. I called her name once, even though I already knew she was not home. No answer. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I took it out, expecting a simple message asking how my day was going or saying she would be back later. Instead, the preview line was long enough to tell me this was not a simple check-in. I opened it. The first message was short and sharp. She said she had heard from a friend that my company was letting people go and asked if that was true. Before I could type a reply, another message came. She said if I had been laid off and had not told her, she felt lied to, that she could not handle being with someone who hid failures from her. I started to type out a calm answer, explaining that I had just come from the meeting and was still processing, that I had planned to tell her in person that evening. While I was drafting those words, another message dropped in. This one did not try to sound understanding. She wrote that she refused to be with an unemployed failure, that she had worked too hard on herself to be dragged down by a man who could not keep his position. She said she felt disgusted that I had allowed myself to be in this situation, after all her warnings about thinking bigger. My throat went dry. I stood in the middle of our living room, the layoff folder on the counter, the box of my work life beside it, and read as more lines appeared. She said she was staying at her parents' house for a while to clear her head. She said I should move out and leave the house to her because she had built her lifestyle and would not go backward. She wrote that if I really loved her, I would not make this harder by clinging to material things. She called my fear of losing the house proof that I cared more about bricks than about her happiness. There was no question in her words, no space for discussion. It was a judgment and a sentence delivered by text, the same method she used to cancel a subscription or reschedule a nail appointment. I felt something inside me shift from shock to a flat, cold clarity. Only one person in my life had spoken to me with more respect that morning, and it was my boss while firing me. The company I served for 10 years had shown me more dignity in my exit than my own wife showed me in what might have been my worst day. That comparison cut deeper than any single phrase she used. I did not write back to her right away. Instead, I took a slow breath and started doing something I had never done before in our marriage. I began keeping receipts. I scrolled up through the thread and took screenshots of each message she had sent that day. From the first accusatory line to the demand that I leave her house. I saved them one by one, careful not to miss anything. I did not edit or answer. I just captured. Then I opened my notes app and wrote down the time and date of the layoff meeting, the names of the people in the room, the offer of severance, and the fact that I had learned my role was gone before I had any chance to tell Lena. Once I had that small set of facts and images collected, I slowly packed a bag. Not everything, just clothes for a few weeks, my toiletries, my laptop, the folder from HR. I walked through each room with a strange sense of distance, like I was visiting a model house that had nothing to do with me. In the bedroom, our bed was still unmade. On her side, the blanket was twisted, the indentation of her pillow still visible. I did not touch it. In the bathroom, her products lined the sink. I left them. I took my own and left the space as I found it. In the living room, our framed wedding photo sat on the shelf. For a moment, I looked at it, at the younger versions of us smiling too hard, believing everything would be simple. Then I flipped it face down and walked away. I called my brother Tom from the front step. When he picked up, I told him in a flat voice that my company had laid me off and that Lena had decided I was not worth staying for. He swore under his breath and asked where I was. I said I was in front of my own house with a bag in my hand. He told me to come to his place right away, that I could take the couch for as long as I needed. I thanked him, locked the door, and put my key back in my pocket. For now, I still held it. I knew that might matter later. By the time I reached Tom's place and dropped my bag, the first wave of shock had worn off and left something steadier behind. After he went to bed, I lay on his lumpy couch in the dark, staring at the ceiling. My phone lay on my chest, screen dim. I unlocked it, opened the message thread with Lena, and scrolled through everything again, slow this time. The insults, the demands, the claims that she refused to be dead-weight caretaker to an unemployed man. Each sentence revealed more about her than about me. Then, almost without thinking, I created a new folder in my phone's storage and named it with her first and last name. Into that folder, I moved all the screenshots from that day. I added the note with the facts about the layoff meeting. After that, I opened my calendar and scrolled to the following week. In an empty morning slot, I created a small reminder and typed in a simple title using the name Marissa had once mentioned in passing. Call Carla. Ask about rights if spouse leaves. I set the reminder and closed the app. The screen went dark in my hand. For the first time that day, I was no longer just reacting. I was quietly marking a line in my own mind about what I would and would not be for her ever again. Tom's couch was not comfortable, but it held me, and for a while that was enough. The first few mornings there blurred together. The sound of his old kettle, his heavy work boots leaving early, the flicker of cheap TV in the corner if I could not sleep. When he left for the garage, the house fell silent, and I sat at his small kitchen table with my coffee, staring at my phone and the folder with Lena's messages. I did not open it every day. It was enough to know it was there, that I finally had a record of something I had always waved away as just stress and bad humor. On Monday night, my calendar reminder pinged softly from my pocket. I remembered, with a dull twist in my chest, the name I had typed in the dark, Carla. Marissa had mentioned her once as the lawyer who had helped her during her own divorce. Back then, I had listened politely, sure I would never need that advice. Now I pressed call. Carla's assistant answered and asked a few simple questions. She said that Carla could see me later that week for a short consultation, that I should bring any documents I had about the house, the marriage, and anything that worried me. Her voice was calm and regular, as if she said these things 10 times a day. That calm steadied me. After the call, I messaged Marissa to thank her for the name. She replied that she was sorry I needed it, but glad I would not be walking blind into whatever came next. She added that if I wanted to talk face-to-face, she was free for a coffee near the office. She said she still thought of me as part of the team, even if my badge no longer opened the door. We met at a quiet cafe not far from my old building. Sitting there without my work laptop felt strange. The staff recognized her and nodded. She had become a regular during long days. She asked how I was holding up. I told her the simple version. The layoff, the severance folder sitting in Tom's living room, the messages from Lena, the bag, the couch. I did not cry. I did not dramatize. I just laid it out in order, like I would talk through a broken process at work. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said that none of this made me a failure. She said that sometimes people show their real selves only when they think you have nothing left to offer. Then she reminded me of something I had almost forgotten. Years earlier, when we bought the house, I had mentioned a prenup and separate property to her in passing. She asked if we had actually signed those papers. Her question sent my memory back to a small office above a strip mall where a younger version of me had sat with a stack of contracts and a lawyer who told me it was better to put things clearly on paper before marriage. At the time, Lena had resisted. She said a prenup killed romance. I had insisted, not because I did not trust her, but because I knew how messy money could make things later. In the end, she signed. She said she was sure we would never need it, and that it was just for my peace of mind. I realized now that I had put that memory in a box and never opened it again. Marissa told me to bring those documents to Carla, along with the house title and mortgage papers. She said I might be in a better position than I thought, especially since Lena had been the one to walk away. Back at Tom's that evening, I opened the plastic bin where I kept my important papers. I had grabbed it from the hall closet when I left the house without really thinking about it. Now I sat on his floor with my back against the couch and laid the files out in a neat row. There was the mortgage contract, clearly listing me as the sole purchaser. There was the thick prenup packet, with both our signatures near the back. I did not read every clause. I did not need to yet. Just seeing my name on the title and the clear lines of ink under our signatures made something inside me loosen slightly. I put the files back in order and slipped them into a simple folder, one I could carry into Carla's office without feeling like my life was spilling out in front of strangers. On the day of the appointment, her office building looked plain from the outside. Inside, it felt more solid than fancy. Shelves of books, framed certificates, a small reception area with quiet music. Carla greeted me with a firm handshake and invited me to sit at a neat desk. She asked me to tell her, in my own words, what had happened. Again, I went through it like a sequence, years of marriage where I covered finances, the house purchase, the prenup, the growing disrespect, the threats about leaving any unemployed man, the layoff, the severance meeting, the folder on my table, the text calling me an unemployed failure and demanding I move out. I did not show her the severance details or the new job talk yet. I only said I would not be destitute for long, that another role was likely coming. She listened closely, occasionally jotting down dates and names. Then she explained in plain language how things usually worked in situations like mine. In our state, she said, the prenup and the fact that the house was in my name gave me a strong base. She said that if Lena had left voluntarily, sent messages making it clear she was walking away, and then tried to claim everything later, the court would look closely at those messages. She asked if I had saved them. When I told her about the folder on my phone with all the screenshots, she nodded and said that was good, that dates and exact words mattered. She did not ask to see them yet. She said there would be time for that if we moved forward. We talked about options. She said I did not have to file for divorce right away if I was not ready, but that she recommended at least getting basic representation and a clear record of what had already happened. She told me I should not leave the house permanently or sign anything without talking to her first. She did not push. She simply laid out the path, like a map with several roads, some smoother than others. At the end of that first consult, she handed me a short engagement letter and said that if I signed it, she could start acting on my behalf in any communication related to the marriage and the house. I did not sign in front of her. I told her I would think and come back. That respect for my pace made me trust her more. On my way back to Tom's, I stopped at our bank branch. The fluorescent light and the long line felt like a different world from Carla's quiet office. When it was my turn, I sat with a young advisor at a low desk and explained that I wanted to open a separate personal account in my own name only. I said I needed somewhere secure for any future payments, separate from the joint account my wife still used. The advisor did not need details. She clicked through forms, asked which email to link, handed me new documents to sign. I did not transfer everything that day. I just laid the pipework so that when severance and anything else landed, I would have more than one bucket to catch it in. That evening, back at Tom's, he asked how it had gone. I told him Carla believed I was not as powerless as I felt, that the house did not simply belong to whoever shouted loudest, and that the law sometimes protected people like me if we actually used it. He said that sounded like the first sensible thing anyone had told me in weeks. Later, when he went out to meet friends, I stayed behind and scrolled through Lena's social media for the first time since I left. I saw a new pattern now. She had posted a photo of herself at her parents' house holding a mug, with a caption about choosing herself and walking away from people who did not support her dreams. Another post hinted that she had just freed herself from a man who was threatened by her ambition. Underneath, friends and acquaintances commented with praise and heart emojis. I saved the posts, not to share later out of revenge, but because they showed the story she was building about us. I knew one day it might matter that I had my own version written down. A few days later, I went back to our house when I knew Lena would be at the gym. Tom drove me, saying he did not want me walking in there alone, even if I insisted I was fine. The neighborhood looked exactly the same as when I left. Our house sat there with its neat lawn and familiar front door like nothing had changed. I unlocked it with my still working key and stepped inside. The air smelled like her perfume, faint but present. There were new shoes by the entryway, not cheap, lined up as if the house itself belonged only to her now. I walked through each room with a purpose. In the bedroom, I took my clothes from the wardrobe and folded them into 2 bags. I left hers hanging. In the nightstand, I found a small notebook where she had written ideas for future events and post captions. I did not read more than a line or two. I closed it and left it where it was. In the home office, I took my old laptop, my external drive, and a box of documents related to my work that I had bought home over the years. I left behind the decor she liked, the fake plants, and the framed quotes about success and energy and never settling. In the kitchen, the table where we had argued about risk and fear sat in the same place. The chair where I had paid bills and heard her talk about dead weight was pushed in neatly. On the counter, I saw the layoff folder where I had put it down the day everything crashed. She had not thrown it away or opened it, at least not enough to move its place. It was like a piece of my reality sitting in the middle of her new performance, ignored. I picked it up and slipped it into my bag. I opened one lower cabinet and pulled out the fireproof envelope where I kept copies of important documents: the prenup, the house title, insurance papers. I checked that everything was still inside, then closed it again. I did not flip through the pages there. I just confirmed they had not vanished. Before leaving, I walked into the living room. The wedding photo was still on the shelf, face down where I had left it. Dust had already started to gather in a faint line along the frame. I did not pick it up. I opened my phone, took one picture of the room for myself, not to share, just as a record of how it looked at this moment when the life we had carefully arranged was already gone in every way that mattered. Then I locked the door behind us and handed the key back to my own pocket, feeling the metal press against my palm for a second longer than usual. In the next days, I made small but important moves. I signed Carla's engagement letter and scanned it to her from Tom's old printer, hearing the machine whir loudly in the quiet house. She replied that she would begin a file on my case, that I should forward any new messages from Lena related to money or property. I called the HR counselor my old company recommended and listened as he told me that my resume and record would make me very employable, especially since I had already been approached by another firm. I did not mention Daniel's name, but I felt more confident reaching out to him again soon. Late one afternoon, after a meeting with the HR counselor, I sat in my car outside Tom's house and just breathed. I realized that somewhere between leaving the company and leaving the house, I had finally stopped assuming that everyone else's needs came before mine. I was not attacking anyone. I was not plotting revenge. I was simply refusing to carry weight that did not belong to me anymore. That, in its own quiet way, felt like the kind of beginning I could trust. That evening, after dinner, Tom fell asleep in front of the TV, half snoring with a blanket thrown over one leg. I turned the volume down and sat at the kitchen table with a glass of water, scrolling aimlessly through my phone. Messages from coworkers popped up, some checking in, some sharing gossip about more layoffs. I replied politely but briefly. Then, as I was about to set the phone down, a new notification slid across the top of the screen. It was from a group chat I had not seen in a while, the Russo family thread. Helen had sent a long message inviting everyone to their grandson's birthday barbecue in 6 weeks at their house, mentioning both me and Lena by name and adding a small, hopeful line asking that, whatever was happening, we could stay civil for the sake of family. In the days after Helen's message about the barbecue, time stopped feeling like a blur and started feeling like a countdown. 6 weeks sounded both very far and very close. I knew that by then, my life would not look like it did now. I did not know the exact shape yet, but I knew the direction. The idea of walking into their backyard as the unemployed failure Lena had described made my chest tighten. The idea of walking in as something else, something steady and separate from her story, made my breathing slow down. I decided that whatever happened before that barbecue, I would not be drifting when I arrived. I would be standing on something solid of my own. The first piece of that solid ground arrived in my inbox 3 days later. It was an email from Daniel with the subject line about an updated offer. I opened it at Tom's kitchen table with his old kettle whistling in the background. Inside was a formal offer letter from his company. The numbers were plain and clear. The base salary was higher than my last one. There was a signing bonus. The role title was more senior, with more responsibility, and a direct line into leadership. The email itself had no fancy language, just a short line saying they would be lucky to have me and hoped I would say yes. I read it twice, then forwarded a copy to my personal email and saved a PDF to my laptop. I did not reply right away. Instead, I picked up my phone and called Daniel. He answered with the easy tone of someone who had been expecting my call. I told him I appreciated the offer and the trust. I said I wanted to accept. He sounded genuinely happy. He said they had followed my work for a while and believed I could help them grow without breaking things. We talked about start dates, onboarding, and a rough plan for the next few months. He did not ask about my personal life. He did not need to know the details to understand I was ready for a clean start. After we hung up, I sat there for a long moment, with my hands flat on the table, letting the fact sink in. I was no longer an unemployed failure. I was between chapters with a clear next line already written. Once I signed and returned the offer, practical steps followed. I went back to the bank, this time with more purpose. The advisor recognized me and asked how I was doing. I told her simply that I had a new job lined up and that I would soon be receiving a severance payment and a signing bonus. I asked how to structure things so my money was protected and cleanly separated from any joint accounts. She suggested moving any incoming large payments directly into the new personal account and then paying down any shared debts from there, leaving whatever remained clearly under my name. We talked about basic safety, nothing fancy. I did not suddenly become someone who wanted to gamble or show off. I just wanted to make sure that if more people tried to treat me like a wallet, there would be limits they could not cross. A week later, I saw the severance land. The number from the meeting room moved from a line on a paper to a balance on my screen. I stared at it in Tom's dim living room, the glow of my phone turning my hands pale. It did not feel like a gift. It felt like a price the company had paid to close a door without a fight. Still, it was real. It meant that for once in my life, I was not hanging from a cliff by my fingernails. I had a cushion. I could breathe. I paid off the joint credit card completely. I knew Lena would notice when she checked it and might tell herself she had won something. I let that thought go. Clearing the debt was for my record, not for her approval. After that, I moved the remainder of the severance and the promised signing bonus into my personal account. A part of me wanted to send her a screenshot just to see her face. I did not. Some victories work better when no one can touch them. Carla and I kept in quiet contact during that time. I sent her a few of Lena's new messages, short demands about certain bills, a complaint that I had abandoned her by leaving the house, hints that she might reconsider everything if I showed I was still capable of caring for her properly. Carla told me to forward them and not answer anything related to money directly. She would handle that later through the right channels. One morning, we met briefly in the hallway of the courthouse to file the first set of papers. The space smelled of old paint and tired air. People walked by with folders and worried faces. We did not linger. We signed what we needed to sign in a side office and stepped back out. Carla reminded me that the process would take time, but that the date of filing mattered. After that, I went back to Tom's and heated leftover soup for lunch. The seriousness of that morning sitting next to me at the small table like another quiet guest. With the job and the legal path moving, another question rose. Where was I going to live once the couch chapter ended? Tom never complained, but we both knew his place was not a long-term solution. I wanted somewhere clean and simple that was mine, not a reminder of compromises. I started looking at small apartments near my future office. The search itself felt different from buying the house with Lena. Back then, every decision had felt like a compromise between her taste and my caution. Now, I had only my own needs to consider. Light, quiet, a short commute. After a week of scrolling and a few viewings, I found a 2-room apartment in a modern building. It had large windows, plain walls, and just enough space. No chandeliers, no dramatic staircase, no place for a vanity ring light. Just a kitchen that worked, a decent bedroom, and a small balcony where a person could sit and think. Signing that lease did not feel romantic. It felt like a contract with myself. I moved what little I owned into it over a weekend. Tom helped me carry boxes. We laughed about how few things I actually had once I stripped away all the shared decor and clutter. A bed, a couch, my desk, some kitchen tools, a TV, books, clothes, those files in the fireproof envelope. In one trip, we also brought the long, narrow box with the framed wedding photo. I did not hang it. I placed it at the back of a closet, behind a stack of old manuals, where it sat like a chapter I was not ready to read again. On the first night in that apartment, I lay on the new bed and listened to the quiet. No TV from another room, no notifications popping from Lena's phone, no sighs about how boring my stories were. Just my own breathing and the distant hum of the city. The last piece did not fall into place until Tom started teasing me about my car. My old sedan still ran, but it was tired. It also carried too many memories. Late-night drives home from work, endless trips to the grocery store, arguments in the parking lot. With the new job coming and my finances finally under my control, he argued that I could afford something better. Not a trophy, just a car that matched the life I was actually living, not the version of me Lena liked to describe. At first I resisted. Big purchases still made my stomach tighten. But after a few days of thought and another talk with the bank about what I could responsibly manage, I agreed to look. The dealership smelled like new plastic and fresh coffee. Bright lights bounced off polished metal. Salespeople drifted around with practiced smiles. I felt out of place at first, but Tom joked and nudged me forward. We looked at a few models. I walked past the loud sports cars. I did not want a bright toy for the street. I stopped in front of a dark, understated luxury sedan. It was sleek but not flashy, solid without being heavy. When I sat in the driver's seat, something clicked. The lines were clean. The controls made sense. It felt like a tool built to do its job well, not scream for attention. The salesperson talked about features and financing. I listened, asked questions, kept my voice calm. I knew what I could afford now, and I refused to be talked into more. In the end, I signed the papers with a steady hand. The down payment came partly from the severance, partly from my savings. The monthly payment would not break me, even if there were bumps. When I drove it out of the lot, Tom whistled and said Lena would choke when she saw it. I said quietly that the car was not for her. It was for me, and for the version of me that had finally stopped apologizing for wanting solid things he had actually earned. Still, I knew what the image would look like, the unemployed failure behind the wheel of something she had never imagined without herself in the passenger seat. Life settled into a different rhythm then. I spent my last days as an official employee helping the HR counselor finish the paperwork on my departure. I prepared mentally for the new role with Daniel's company, reading their materials at my new apartment's small desk in the evenings. In quiet moments, I scrolled through Lena's accounts. She kept posting pictures at her parents' house with captions about healing, gym clips with Tyler under lines about leveling up and letting go of dead weight, selfies with vague hints that she had escaped a man who did not believe in her. Her friends cheered her on. None of them knew about the severance, the new job, the lawyer, or the lease. They saw only what she chose to show them. I stopped feeling the urge to correct that picture. I simply saved the worst posts and closed the apps. Every so often, she messaged me directly. At first, she sent sharp lines about bills, about her rights to the house, about how I had abandoned her. I forwarded those to Carla and let her answer in the formal way she knew best. Then the tone shifted slightly. One afternoon, she sent a neutral text asking if I was okay, saying she hoped I was not too depressed. She added a sentence about how she still wanted me to succeed, even if we were no longer together, because she did not like seeing anyone fail. I stared at that message for a long minute, then put the phone down. It was another performance, for herself, if not for me. I did not respond. The barbecue date crept closer. I could have skipped it. Nobody could force me to show up. But Helen's message had been kind, and part of me wanted the last word on my own story in that family to be my presence, not Lena's version of me. I also wanted to see with my own eyes how everyone reacted when the picture in their heads collided with the reality they had never asked about. The night before the event, I parked my new car in the underground spot that came with my apartment and stood for a moment looking at it under the dim lights. It did not look like a trophy. It looked like a calm, expensive statement someone had tried very hard to pretend I would never be able to make. On the morning of the barbecue, I dressed in a way that felt like me, just sharpened slightly. Clean dark jeans, a pressed shirt, simple shoes. No attempt to look rich, no attempt to look broken. Just a man who had somewhere to be and chose to show up on his own terms. The drive to Helen and Mark's house felt both familiar and strange. I had driven those streets many times as a son-in-law who brought wine, helped set tables, and listened to family stories. This time, there were no shared plans, no quick check-in with Lena about what story we would tell. There was only quiet music on the radio and the low hum of the engine. When I turned onto their street, kids' voices floated from the yards. Balloons bobbed above the fence in the Russo backyard. I parked at the curb a little down from their driveway, where everyone walking up would still see the car. I turned off the engine and sat for a second, watching my reflection in the dark screen of the infotainment system. Then I stepped out into the sunlight. The car's paint caught the light in a soft, deep way, not flashy, but impossible to miss for anyone who knew what they were looking at. I locked it, slipped my phone into my pocket, and started walking toward the gate that led to the backyard. Halfway up the sidewalk, I heard the sound of another car door closing behind me. Tires had just crunched on gravel. I did not have to turn around to know who it was. I could feel the weight of her stare on my back like heat. My phone buzzed in my pocket at the same moment, a new message appearing just as I reached for the latch to Helen's gate. My hand was on the latch when my phone buzzed again, harder this time against my leg. I paused, took it out, and saw her name on the screen. The preview showed enough. She wrote that she had just seen the car and that it suited me, said she had always believed in my potential. Then came the line that told me exactly where her mind still was. She wrote that she really believed in second chances, that maybe we could talk and see if there was a way back from all this now that I was finding my feet again. I stood there on the sidewalk with the sound of kids and laughter drifting over the fence and read the message twice, feeling nothing sharp, only a steady, clean calm. I scrolled up without thinking and found the thread from the day of the layoff. The words I had saved looked the same as the night I captured them. Unemployed failure, dead weight, demands that I move out and leave her house, claims that she refused to be dragged down by a man who could not hold his position. Next to those messages was the timestamp from the HR meeting, proof that I had not even had time to tell her in person before she decided I was no longer worth staying beside. I took a fresh screenshot, making sure the date, her words, and the small icons all showed clearly. Then I opened a new message window to her and started typing, slowly. I thanked her, in plain language, for reminding me of her beliefs about second chances. I attached the screenshot of her old texts. I told her I had indeed been laid off that day, and that my former company had given me a severance large enough to buy the car she had just seen and more. I added that a better job had already been lined up before she wrote those words, that I was not unemployed for even a month. I wrote that what had destroyed us was not my career, but the way she treated me the moment she thought my paycheck might stop. I kept my tone flat. No insults, no curse words, just facts. I told her that the divorce papers were already in motion through my attorney, that the house she believed was hers was in my name and protected by a prenup she had signed without caring to read. I said I would follow the law and be fair where the law required it, but that there would be nothing beyond that. Finally, I told her that there would not be a second chance, not now that I knew exactly how quickly she could step over me when she thought I had nothing left to give. Then I hit send. A few seconds later, from the corner of my eye, I saw her by the curb, phone in hand, still half turned toward my car. Her face changed as she read. First confusion, then recognition as she saw her own sentences staring back at her, then a raw kind of panic. Helen opened the gate when she saw me and smiled with automatic warmth, then noticed Lena behind me and the tension in the air. She asked if everything was okay. Lena started to say something about me being cruel, about me blindsiding her, but Helen put a hand on her arm and asked quietly what he had said. I did not move closer. I did not explain. I just stepped into the yard, greeted a nephew who ran up with a toy, and let the phone in Lena's hand do the talking for me. Through the sliding glass door, I later saw Helen and Mark reading the screen together while Lena spoke fast, hands moving. Their faces went from concern to disappointment. Mark looked up once toward the yard, his eyes finding me across the distance. There was no anger there, only a tired understanding. They led their daughter inside, voices low. No one came out to demand an explanation from me. No one called me a failure to my face. The story she had been telling about me had run into the wall of her own words, and there was nothing left for me to add. I stayed long enough to sing happy birthday and hand the kid his present. I spoke politely with relatives, answered simple questions about my new role, and did not mention severance or court papers. When it felt right, I thanked Helen and Mark, told them I wished them well, and walked back to my car. My phone buzzed once more in my pocket as I reached for the handle. I saw her name, opened the thread long enough to press on it, and slid my thumb over the block option. The screen flashed a small confirmation. Her side of the conversation stayed frozen in place. Mine ended there. Back at my apartment, the air felt cool and still. I hung my keys on the small hook by the door and set my phone face down on the table. No voices came from another room. No notifications bounced around demanding I fix someone else's mess. I walked to the window and looked out at the fading light, then turned back toward the door. I closed it behind me with a soft, final click and stood there for a second, alone but steady, knowing that this was the only second chance I was interested in, the one I was giving myself.